So in React, we learned about data binding and style binding and class binding and event binding. These are the topics we discussed till now. So data binding is nothing but accessing data from the source, updating into UI, and identifying changes in UI and updating back. We learned one-way binding, two-way binding. Style binding is dynamically applying the styles so that you can change the appearance dynamically for any event, and dynamically applying the classes and how to handle events. So what is event, how event works, from where the virtual DOM events are derived. Virtual DOM events are derived from synthetic events, that is the base. And what are the various types of events? We saw different events, how to use them. Have you tried that exercise? Able to achieve? I asked you to try one example with form. You tried? So you must able to implement all this knowledge in some interface. So we will try to create an interface and we will try to implement all this in that interface. So let's see how it can happen. For that, in order to design an interface for interactions in interface is done through forms. And you saw React way of handling form is a difficult thing because the React way of handling form, it's lengthy. You saw the concept, how we collect the data from every element, how we store in the references and all, and how to display. So what you have to learn here is how we can manage the forms in a better way, easy, so that it will help to create good interface. So we will try creating one application. With this knowledge, we can create some various interfaces we can create. But working with forms will be a difficult job because form requires a lot of two-way binding. And to manage two-way binding with React, because React is supporting only one-way binding, it requires a lot of technique. To simplify that, various third parties are used. We will see about that, how to manage them. So first I will show you how we can work with the forms in React. After learning data binding, style binding, class binding, and event binding, you need to have a perfect knowledge on forms, because you have to deal with a good interface allowing user to input values, edit the values, delete the values. Then you need a form. We will see how React can manage the form. So you know what is a form. Technically, form provides an interface from where user can interact with the data, from where user can interact with the data. It allows to handle CRUD operations. You know what are CRUD operations, right? So create, read, update, and delete. You can handle different types of the CRUD operations. So what is the problem in React to handle forms? I will show you the process. That means how to handle a form, how we can manage the data from a form. So handling form in a React way is always complex. Handling form in React way is always complex. It requires a lot of event and data binding techniques. It requires a lot of event and data binding techniques. We will see one example first. So we will see an example how we can handle form. So handling form and React way is very complex. I already showed you in data binding, but a simple approach I will give here, a small approach I will give here. So for example, we will create a simple interface. First, we will try the basic approach. Then we can work with complex. You can use any kind of content actually. So let's say I'm adding a new component, npm start. So I'm creating a new component here by name form demo. Okay. Now in the component, let's add some effects. Actually, yeah. So we are creating a new file, form demo.jsx. Yeah, let's design a form, export function form demo, and here we will return a simple container. Now here we are designing a form and we need some actions. I hope you already learned when you are developing an interface for any front-end applications, it is not necessary to use a form element always. Can you tell me when to use a form and when it is not necessary to use a form element? Without form element also, you can put text box, button, checkbox, radios and all. So when a developer decides that I can design a form without the form element, so when A developer is designing a form not to submit to server, but to handle only some interactions client side. Then he will go with the design of form without really form. For example, you see now here, suppose we have some data. Let's say we have some bank, and this is some bank application. Now this is some HDFC bank. In this, we have some EMI calculator, personal loan EMI calculator, and this calculator is having a form. So this calculator is having a form with some elements. Now in this, user can select amount, user can select years, user can select interest rate. Now the question is where this is going to be posted. So you have a calculate button, and what this calculate button is going to do, it is going to calculate and return the result of the calculation what they selected. Is it required to post this data anywhere to server? It's not required. Then a developer designs a form without really form. That means when you need a form, because you know form is a generic element. Form is a generic element. That means you put anything in form, by default it have validations. By default it have submittability. By default it have resetability. That means it have generic functionality. We don't want that generic functionality. We want just to perform certain actions client side without really implementing the form functions. In that case, in all such situations, we design a form without a form, means without a form element we design. Why? Because we just want some client side interactions. We don't want to submit. Then we have to do this. So developer, you see, I selected something. So I choose some years. I selected an interest rate and click on calculate. It should calculate and display here. That means it will show the monthly EMI to be paid. But it is not going to submit anything here. You see, submit has an hash. What does this refers to? Hash refers to an ID in the same page. It is hash location. Hash refers to an ID in the same page. That means some ID reference in the same page. So it is not submitting to any page. It is returning the same page. So when you design any form in any web environment, it's not necessary to keep a form. So we will see one example. So what is the concept is, React can design a form interface without using form element. React can design a form interface without using form element. So React can design a form interface without using the form element. So this approach is required when your interface is not submitting data to server. It is just handling client side interactions. It is just handling client side interactions. So this approach is required when your interface is not submitting data to server. So it is just handling client side interactions. Then you need to follow this approach. So that is the basic approach. So you can create a form in this way and implement it. For example, let's see how we can design this. That means if you have idea on your JavaScript and all, you know how to create this. Let's see how to create like this. That means how we can design an interface like this. So using React. So this is a React, and you see here, for example, sometimes developers have an habit of displaying, actually control H. Developer have an habit of designing the same actually without the form or with form. But usually with form, when they design, they disable the generic functionality. How to disable the generic functionality? Prevent default. But that's not necessary. So you can design a form without a form, right? Let's see how to create this interface. A small example I will show you how we can design this interface. So let's say this is a form demo, and without the form, we want to create this. Class name is container fluid. Yeah. So to design this interface, I'm just using another container. So margin top BG dark. So this is just we'll put like this. This container fluid will have BG dark, text white. And let's keep the padding as 4. Okay. Now in this we have a heading, personal loan EMI calculator. So the class text center. Okay. Let's keep that form demo in startup. Okay. And the form demo in the startup. So we have this. Now in this, let's create an interface. So just matching it. So we will keep a div class padding 2. Okay. And in this we will add another div. So this is having class BG light, text dark. Okay. And we have a row. And in this we have columns. Col. And just I am adding 3 columns. So now you need to define here amount you need, and a text box. Input type is text. Okay, so size we set to some 10. Okay, for input type is text and size is for years. So interest rate, so input type is text and here we defined size as again 4%. So this is the top we are having. Amount you need for how many years and how much interest rate. Right? Now we need some sliders for that. I will create another row. So class name row, margin top, and this row also have 3 columns. Call. So we are having 3 columns where you have an amount like so 1 lakh something. Okay, and input type is equal to range and min is equal to some 1 lakh. Okay, max is equal to some 10 lakhs, right? And value is equal to with starting we will keep 1 lakh like this, and the value, so here 10. Okay, that is one input element, and we have another input element. In this is 1 to 5, that is number of years. Min is 1 and max is 5 and value is 1. And another one here, so min is some 10.45, min is 10.45, max is some 18.45, value is 10.45. You know step, right? Step will be 0.01. So this is 18.45. That is the percent. So interest rate. So that is the slider we are having. These are the sliders we are having. That means user can select the amount. User can choose them and use. But here currently they are not allowing to slide. They are not allowing to slide. You know, two-way binding is not supported by default. That means we need to implement two-way binding explicitly, because whatever values are there they can show, but whatever values are there you cannot update. For updating you need two-way binding to configure. Okay, let's create another one. So div and class name as row, and in this div we have class name as call and a text end, and we have a button. So this is calculate. So class BTN and BTN primary, and here we have margin top 4. Okay, this is the calculate button we are having. Now we need to implement this. So I will add another div in this class as row and margin top 4. And this I will keep simple to keep the result. Class name as call. I will keep it for the result. Later we will display result there. Now how do we make it function? Because the issue is two-way binding not supported. If it is your JavaScript or jQuery, directly the elements start sliding. Directly you can enter the values. You can define the functionalities. Here it is not supporting the sliding of these values and selection. So let's implement that now. First, when user slides the slider, this value must be displayed in the text box. So we have to declare a constant. So in the constant, you need the values. Suppose EMI values. Set EMI values. You can create one object in that you can store 3 values. Individually, you can define like amount, and this is set amount, and it is use state, and it is a number. Similarly, you need years, set years, and use state, and you need the number, and you need another. What is it? So we need interest rate, interest, or say simply rate, and set rate, and you need use state. So that is also a number. You know, number type in JavaScript can handle 0 is a number, right? In JavaScript, a number type means it can handle so many things: signed integer, integer, unsigned integer, unsigned integer, and floating point, double, decimal, binary, hexa, octa, big int, exponent. Am I right? In JavaScript, these are all the number types. A number in JavaScript means it can handle all this. It can handle signed, unsigned integers. It can handle floating point, double, decimals. It can handle binary, hexa, octa values. ES6 and higher, they introduced big int so that you can safely use a long integer. Big ints are defined with suffix n and exponent. So you just mentioned 0. Now you don't worry that is it decimal, 0.0, not required, because 0 is JavaScript number, and JavaScript number can handle everything. It is not necessary that you mention 0.0, then it will be a decimal. Not necessary. Directly 0 itself is a number. And in a JavaScript environment, number means it can be any of these. Because some languages have specific. If they have to handle fraction, they have to declare 0.0. But here just 0, because that's itself a number, and JavaScript number is any of this. It can manage all these types. You learned all these types in JavaScript. So why we need a big int? So to safely use a large integer. Suppose you have a large integer value use. If you want to use the such large integer, there is a threat of round that integer. We don't want the integer to be round to the nearest. then you have to mark it with the n. That's how we configure the begins in JavaScript. Or there is another option. You can use max safe integer. This is a method which is used to use your large integers safely. In JavaScript, you can find the maximum and the minimum safe integers. You can define them. Usually, these are the values we configured. Okay. Now, next point is when you define this, when you configure this, now let's put the change events. When user is changing, so that means what we have to do, we have to write a function handle amount change. On amount change, the value of amount we will collect through event argument, and we will set amount. Set amount e dot target dot value. And similarly, handle. So we have handle year change. Year change have to collect the year and set year. Set years e dot target dot value. So similarly, one more option function, what it is? Rate change, handle rate change. On rate change, we need to collect the interest rate and set rate. E dot target dot value. So these all must be binded to these sliders. That means we will go to the range here on change. This is handle amount change. Here on change, it should handle rate change. And on change, this should handle, this is rate change. Yeah, this is rate change, this is year change. Like this we have to do. That means when user is sliding, now this user is sliding these values here. When user is sliding the values, they should update. But still it is not updating. Why? Because you are configuring on change. And you are defining a value. This value is actually fixed. If value is fixed, you cannot change the value. That is the drawback of one-way binding. Generally, the technologies that support two-way binding, even you configure a value, it can be changed. Default, they allow to change. But here, you fix a value. This is read-only now. It will not allow to change the value. So now what you need to do is, you need to change set the value dynamic. That means now remove this value. We are not configuring the value. So we are not defining the value. So let's remove this value. Or how to put it dynamic, I will tell you. We are not setting this value. Now what happens if value is not defined? Now you can see this is the slider changing. But I want this slider to be here. By default, it is at 5. I want this slider to be here. That means what we need to do is, if you want some value dynamically, actually, this is the amount. What is the starting amount? It's a number. But the starting amount should be 1 lakh. What is the starting years? It should be 1. What should be the rate? It should be 10.45. These are the values, default. And for example, now, here, what is the range value? This value is coming from amount. It is coming from amount. That means now this amount value is working fine. Now what is this value? This value is coming from what? Years. And years value is 1. Now if your years value above, you mentioned 2, suppose 3, then by default it will be at 3. That dynamically you decide how you need to configure. Now what we need to do here is we need to set up the same, the value. So value is what? This is rate. That means the concept of events are very simple for JavaScript people. But in React, lot of technical issues will come. If you don't know these minor concepts, you will unable to handle the functionality. That's the reason they may look simple, but these simple points, if you don't know, then it will not behave exactly how you are looking, because it has a lot of one-way techniques. This one-way techniques always confuse the developers who are already aware of two-way binding, because all these days you are working with two-way binding, you don't have an issue with one-way binding, so these kind of issues will never rise for you. But in React, everywhere you will find this. You will not able to change until you apply on change. You will not able to modify the value until the value is dynamic. These all minor points you need to know, otherwise it cannot implement. Okay, now when this is changing, the value that is changing, it should update in these text boxes. That means what is the value of text box? Text box value is amount. What is the value of this? Years. What is the value of this text box? This is what? Rate. These are the values you binded to text boxes. And here when you are moving, it is moving, it is changing. That means it is changing and it is displaying the number of years, the interest rate. Now the point here is, of course, you can allow the user to change from the text box. By default, even you can lock it also. By default, it is locked for editing. That means if I try to type some 4, it's not typing there. I'm unable to input now. Why? If you want to handle the input, then you should write on change. That means you want to change from text box, then put an on change for text box. And on change, it have to set the years. That means if you don't do that, then usually it is one way. Sometimes that looks good because we don't want allowed to modify directly the value. We want only slider. Why we don't want to modify the value? Because when user types a value, he may enter a range of value which is not in their scope. We don't want user to enter a value which is not in the scope. We want a user to select the value which is in the scope. Then the best option is don't allow to type, allow to choose. That means if anybody asks when I should use a slider, why can't I ask a text box and ask him directly type what amount you want? No, you can't, because he may enter some value which is out of range. Then again, headache is you have to validate. So now you don't need to validate because it restricts. Is there a possibility that he can select value less than 1 lakh? There is no chance. If you give a text box only to enter value, he may enter a small value. Then what? Again, you have to do some validation. You have to verify the value is less than 1 lakh and put a message, please enter from 1 lakh to 10 lakh. But now there is no chance. User can choose only within this range. Now let's implement the calculate. When user selects amount, when user selects this, and when user selects. And when I click on calculate, I want to display the result. That means how much he need to pay. Of course, every business calculation requires some business formula behind. You are a web developer, so you don't need to be genius in mathematics, but you should have a general awareness of how to convert a mathematical formula into the computer understandable JavaScript formula. Right now, the point is how you will calculate the EMI and display. What is the formula for EMI? That's a mathematical one. And the mathematical formula you cannot implement directly, because this is a computer technology which will not allow mathematics science, and a computer language will never allow mathematical science, all mathematical science. Then we have to manage with our built-in libraries, mathematical libraries, mathematical operators. We have to implement that. For example, what is the EMI formula? Actually, they will give you the EMI formula here itself. This is EMI formula. Every business will give you the EMI formula. But how you will write this in JavaScript based technologies, how you will write in your .NET, in your C, C++, in your Java, in your any technology. That means there will be certain libraries which allows you to represent the mathematical way in a computer understandable format. And for example, actually, let's see here, EMI formula. You can see this is the EMI formula. This is the EMI formula. I will give you a diagram here. This is an EMI formula. This is an EMI formula. Now, how come a web developer can implement this in his calculations? That is what his knowledge of operators and knowledge of his mathematical functions provided by his libraries. You know, .NET, Java, and other technologies, they have a separate library for handling various scientific and mathematical operations. By using that library, they can implement such functionalities. So for example, let's do this now first. How do you calculate this? So we need to implement on click. We have to implement on click. That means we have to write a function, handle, calculate click. On calculate click, what is the functionality? On calculate click, what is the functionality to perform? The functionality is calculate click first. We will get here, I'm just using the values, right? The values is here actually principal. So principal is the value. So you have a principal. Principal is the loan amount. How much amount? So the principal is the amount. Amount is a state which contains the value. After that, you need another option. We need interest rate. Interest rate. That means, so our principal, I will just give it as P. Just we will implement in the formula. R is interest rate. So we will get the rate by 12 by 100. Because interest rate is written in percent, you need to convert that percent into a number, so that you have to perform that calculation using numeric. Okay. Next option. So by 12 by 100 is nothing but per year, how much interest rate it is, because you have to calculate loan amount for every month. Now it is asking how much. This is total number of periods. So total number of periods. How? Total number of periods. That means where n is equal to total number of periods is nothing but years into 12. years is 3 years, 4 years, but interest amount should be calculated for every month. So that means 2 years means 24 months. Now we have to calculate EMI for every month. How do we calculate EMI for every month? P principal amount into interest rate. See the formula, principal amount into interest rate into 1 plus r to the power of n. That means now how do you define into? Here you need to define. So math.pow, which is a JavaScript math operation, power how much? 1 plus r raised to the power of n. 1 plus r raised to the power of n. That means 1 plus r raised to the power of n. That means how do you configure this? So math dot pow, that is 1 plus r comma n. That means you know math dot pow is 2 comma 3, 2 to the power of 3, right? That's how you raise the power of that. That means we need to implement this now. Okay, after that, divided by. So divided by, so here it is slash math.pow. So how much? 1 plus r, 1 plus r to the power of n and minus 1. That means it should calculate the math power and minus 1. So it should perform this operation. That is the EMI amount we have. And this EMI should be displayed. This is the formula you implement. And this EMI, that means I will put in a parenthesis like this, suppose. This EMI should be displayed. I think we don't need parenthesis. Huh? Yeah. So this EMI should be displayed. It should be displayed. We need to access this EMI and display here. That means, so your monthly installment amount, an installment is, so we will put a bold and with a binding as what? EMI for how many years? So for we will put what? Years. For years. So we will put the word years. This is the option we are displaying. That means now here we have to handle that calculate. So EMI is not defined. It's a general scope variable. Na? We will keep it in a function. That means we will keep it in a state. So we have a constant. What it is? Result or say EMI. Set EMI and is equal to use state. It's a number. And here this value will just keep set EMI is whatever the EMI value is, so that I can access the EMI and use the EMI. Okay. Now here I am selecting the amount and I am selecting number of years and I am selecting interest rate and click on calculate. It should get handle calculate not written. So for calculate button click, on click, so handle calculate click. We haven't binded that. Now let's see here the amount you need, the number of years, and with interest rate and calculate, it should get that. You want to bind the value, that means round the value. You know how we can round. So we have to use math dot what round and the EMI value, round the EMI value, and you round the EMI value, and to local string we can convert into local string en hyphen in. So in that style will be what currency, and currency is what INR. Currency is INR. That's the option we are using. So you select the amount, you select the interest years, and you select the interest rate, and calculate it should get. That is basically how we implement the design of a form. But here we don't need really a form element. Why you don't need a form element? Because we don't want to submit anything to server. We want to just handle client side interactions. In that case, this is the best way to configure your forms. This is just to show you an example so that you will get idea of several things you don't know. Here what the key points you have to take is the values must be dynamic. You cannot put constant values. If you put constant values, because React is one way binding, it will not allow to change. And you cannot change value of any element without writing on change. It's necessary that you have to mention on change. So you have to collect and display. And this is an example of the transaction. So EMI calculator. I just designed one example for you. This is completely creating an interface without really required any concept of form. We don't need a form. Generally, when you need a form, when you are trying to submit this data to the server. So if you have some API, you have some database, and you need to submit your data into the database. In that case, you need this thing. And very important is usually another important concept is above what we mentioned is this is the approach. Yeah, the approach of UI within form element is mostly required while communicating with while communicate while communicating with backend APIs that allow to submit data from client. The approach of UI within form element is mostly required while communicating with backend API that allow to submit data from client. That is the concept. And as I already told you, the React way of designing is always lengthy, because already I showed you in two-way binding. Every element value you have to collect, and every element value you have to manage. So to overcome the problems with React way already I showed you, no need to explain again. You see, I think we learned in data binding. In data binding, I showed you how to collect the data from the form with various fields and submit the data. That's a difficult thing. Lot of complexity is there. Now to overcome these issues, what React have done is, so React provides support for various third party form libraries. React provides support for various third-party form libraries to configure and validate a form. To configure and validate a form. So React provides support for various third-party form libraries to configure and validate a form. There are so many form libraries. So that is the reason developers in real-time development, they don't show interest with the direct React way. Almost every application implements form by using third parties. There are so many third parties. So we have like Formic. So we have like React Hook form. We have like Telerik form. Telerik forms. Telerik actually, Telerik can do form. That's so many are there. Hundreds are there. Hundreds of form libraries are present. By using these libraries, React developers will implement the form interface so that it is easy for them to manage a form. Collecting data from all elements in the form, submitting the data to server is a very difficult job in a direct React way. That's the reason 100 to 100% you will see people using any third party in real time. And unfortunately, the problem for you is we are not sure which third party your company uses. Then nobody can tell you that this you learn so that it will be used in your company. So everyone can give you an idea how third parties work. With that idea, you should able to implement the new third party used in your project. Majority of third parties, mostly commonly Formic and React Hook form. These are very popular in companies. Even Telerik forms. These three are very popular in companies. But others, we are not sure. Sometimes companies may be using several other third party forms. We are not sure. But if you can handle any one third party, others also same. As a developer, you need to explore its functions, its features, and you have to learn by yourself. That will be easy once you know any third party, right? Because see, technologies like React, Angular, one of the big headache with them is by the time you finish React, another version is ready. That means for every version, every new feature, you will not join a course, right? Then how you will know about the new feature and functionality? It is not necessary to watch YouTube for or wait for somebody to explain it and so that you can use it. Because anybody who tries to explain you that concept on YouTube or anywhere, he may explain according to his knowledge on it relative to his application. That may not help you every time. Then you have to explore yourself and know about it and implement. So you have to learn the concept. So actually, you can visit this official website, npmjs.com. This is the official website of Node Package Manager. Here you can search for third parties, you can explore them, you can learn about them, and you can implement them. Some are free, some are paid, right? For example, you see, we will visit this here. So this is npmjs.com. In this npmjs.com, so you search React forms and you will see, when you search for React forms, you will see so many other React hook form, formic form, and so many Redux form, house form, so many. Hundreds of third parties are present. And you cannot say that this is best. That is decided by their requirement. Because according to certain requirements, a third party may not be good for you. Then you have to implement another, because it may not have what you are looking for. So in that case, you have to implement by yourself. This is another. I will show you how to use it. Another option is, we have like Telerik. You see Telerik, Telerik is a third party. It is popular in building effective user interface. And you see, these are the customers of Telerik: NASA, Microsoft, IBM. And you go to Telerik React demos. We will go to demos. In that we will select React demos, and they will give a React form to you. So you can use these forms and implement. And all libraries are not same. Every library have its own syntax, its own functions. So you have to thoroughly read it and implement it. Let's see. I will give you two examples. We will learn these two. One is Formic and React hook form. Telerik is a paid service. So you have to pay and use. You cannot freely use. So, but if you can handle one, you can handle easily others. Let's see how to implement this forming, how it makes the form interactions simple. Remember, it is a very big library. It has several levels. One by one, we will see. Let's see. For example, now, how these formic forms work. Formic forms. We will see the concept of formic forms. So it is a third party form library for React. Form library for React. So it provides predefined components that make the form implementation easy. That make the form implementation easy. So how this works, let's see. First thing is you have to install Formic library for your project. npm install Formic and save. So Formic library provides use Formic hook. It will provide a use Formic hook, which is used to configure a form. Which is used to configure a form. We can configure a form by using use Formic hook. So you have to import use formic from formic library. Then we have to create a constant formic use formic. That is the hook. Actually, this use formic hook provides options. It will provide options. So, what are the options it provides and how to use those options? Let's see. So, the formic library is going to provide some options which will make everything easy for you. Let's see actually. Suppose now I will create a new page, means new component. So in the components, I will add formic demo. Okay, formic demo dot .jsx. So export function formic demo. Now here we are creating a return. So it returns a container in this. So here we want to design a form. This form have like register product something. Now in this what we will do, let's keep basic details first. Later we will add some more details. Suppose we have a data term name. So we have a text box, input type text. Similarly, we have price. Input type is text. Or we will keep it as input type as number. Okay. Next, we have another data term, stock. And here we defined input type as checkbox. And here we'll put a label as in stock. Okay, now this is the form we are having, and we have a button called submit. Now what we want to do is, when we want to collect all the data from the form, this is formic demo, and this is the form we are having. We want to collect the data from the form. You saw already when we done this manually, so much lengthy logic. For every element you have to write on change. On change you have to write a function. That function should collect the value. But see now how a third party can manage this. How a third party can manage. We will install the formic library here. So we are installing npm install formic and save. We are installing a formic library here. Okay. Now, yeah. Next, we have to use the formic library here. So import use formic from formic. You have to import formic from formic. and you have to create a constant formic which uses this use formic. Use formic have set of options. What is the first option is, what are the values this formic have to handle? Means what are the values this form have to handle? So they are defined as initial values. Initial values is an object that defines the values it should handle. Now tell me, what are the values it should handle? It should handle name, which is string. It should handle price, it is number. It should handle stock, which is a boolean false. These are the values it should handle. Now, very important is how it refers these values. It is very important that every element inside the form should use a name that must be the initial value. That means it maps to name. And what is name? You know already. You learnt in HTML, name is mandatory. If name is not defined, form cannot submit the value of that element. In HTML, you learned that. So in HTML, you learn that every element in a form must have a name. If it is not defined, then it cannot submit. So you have a name, this is price. And you have a name, this is stock. Now what should happen is, here we want the initial values name, price and stock. These values must be binded with these elements. That means whenever user changes text box, that must be stored inside this name. That means now very simple. Actually, we write on change. On change. Formic reference is having handle change. Directly it is having. That's it. That means you don't need to write on change function. That function, earlier what we have to do, we have to write a function and we need to point that function and pass the value. But now formic have a handle change. It will identify the change inside this field and it will collect that value you entered and it will store in initial values. Similarly, every element on change formic dot what handle change. Every element should handle change. On change as formic dot handle change. Okay, that's good. That means now you are collecting the value from every element. After that, when user submits the form, we have to collect the data and submit to server. That means how to write a form submit event. To write a form submit event in the form, you have to write what? On submit. And this also formic handle submit. Handle submit. That means formic have a submit event. Now, how to mention that submit is, in the formic you have initial values and you have on submit. On submit is a function. What this function will do? This function is going to collect all the values. It is going to collect all the values. That means it is going to collect all the values. Values are nothing but these initial values. And you do whatever you want with those values. Temporarily, what I am doing, I am using an alert. I am submitting those values. That means I will use values. I will give like JSON. JSON dot what? String 5 and whatever the values. JSON string 5 is nothing but it will convert that into a string and we will collect the value just roughly. Later we will submit this to server, right? That means now you see you are not writing any function. There is no handle change. There is no handle submit function written. Earlier you saw we have to write change for every element. You have to right click for the submit. But now see, everything is ready. Now let's enter the data here. So we are entering the details. So the name, suppose the price, some price we are entering, and some stock we are selecting, and click on submit. So you see it is a some binding values. Okay. And the submit, it should submit the data and display. So it's very simple. The same thing when you done without any third party. In a React way, if you have to do, it's a lengthy process. And remember, this is not done. This is one way of Formic. Formic have several techniques. If you try to start using those techniques, you will feel more simple in implementation. It will be very simple. So this is Formic. There are other third parties which are more different. They may provide more features. That depends on your requirement you have to use. That means now we designed a simple form interface, and without writing much complex logic, we are able to collect the data from the form and use that data. So this Formic is going to have some options. And what are the basic options here? In the options, you have initial values, you have on submit, you have like, so on submit validation. So you have like validation schema. So many are there. You will learn one by one. So another point, Formic have various built-in events. So like handle change, like handle blur, like handle submit. These are so many events it is having. What is advantage of that? Without writing them, you can implement them. Without writing them, you can implement them. So this is an example for Formic demo.jsx. I will keep this example for you. So this is just the design of form. Now in this, you have to learn a lot of things. How validation is done, how to verify the values before we submit the values. You know validation. How to manage the validations in the form, and what are the various other techniques provided by this Formic. Once you know Formic, another third party also I will show you. You can try any of them, right? So that we'll see in next session. Tomorrow we will continue, right? In tomorrow's session, we will discuss more about Formic, how to handle Formic, what features it provides and use, so that form design will be easy. Later we can implement in hosting with backend database and all. Okay. Tomorrow we'll continue with that.
ले बेटे ये कोई करती उधर का नाम का
पीछे पानी
गाँव की पानी तो ये पिया कहाँ है पानी मिला तो सब आदमी 10 से चला जा रहा है तो फायदा ले रहा है कोई दूसरा आदमी देखे रहे हो छोटा वाला बॉक्स में बच्चा चला गया ठंडा में
आलू मंगाइए तो भाजी बनेगा सीखी
हमने 4 जगह में लगा
इससे मंगावे बच्चे आलू
सास
भेजे
से
या
ये जाइए करेंगे दिख रहे हैं
मैं 4 दिन लगा 4 दिन लगा
ना ले रहा है दूसरा चार्जर को तोड़ देगा क्या पत्नीवा
Roba, lamu.